Britain's police forces spent the 1940s chasing criminals in cars that could barely chase anything. Stay to the end for the one force that armored a car meant for Vickers. Like this video and subscribe if you want more of Britain's forgotten machines. This is the countdown. Number 10, Austin 16, 1945. A car built for commercial travelers, pressed into service for constables. The Austin 16 resumed production in 1945 from the Austin Motor Company at Longbridge, a pre-war design carried over almost unchanged into the post-war catalog. Its 2.2-liter four-cylinder engine produced around 67 brake horsepower. Road tests of the period recorded a top speed in the region of 70 miles per hour. Several county forces adopted the Austin 16 as general duty transport because it was available, reasonably roomy, and cheap to maintain compared to the larger saloons on the market. It was never designed with police work in mind. The cabin was built for commercial travelers and their sample cases, not for radio equipment, restrained suspects, or long stationary shifts on observation duty. The unexpected fact: several forces that adopted the Austin 16 found its handling characteristics, tuned for comfortable long-distance touring rather than quick response driving, made it noticeably slower to reach an incident than the motorcycles it was meant to support. Officers on two wheels regularly beat the car to the scene. A car chosen for its price, not its purpose. It filled a gap. It did not fill it well. Number 9, Standard 12, 1945. Reliable, unremarkable, and entirely unsuited to catching anyone in a hurry. The Standard 12 returned to production in 1945 from the Standard Motor Company of Coventry, a modest pre-war saloon revived with no meaningful updates. Its 1.6-liter four-cylinder engine produced roughly 45 brake horsepower, giving a recorded top speed of around 62 miles per hour. Smaller borough forces, working with tight post-war budgets, bought the 12 because it was among the cheapest new saloons available with 4 doors and reasonable durability. It served well enough as a car for desk sergeants moving between stations. The unexpected fact: the Standard 12's low power output meant that on several documented occasions, pursuit attempts against motorcyclists or lighter pre-war sports cars ended not in an arrest but in the 12 simply being outrun on open road, a limitation officers of the time openly complained about in force correspondence. A dependable car for paperwork. A poor one for pursuit. Number 8. Wolseley 14 of 60, 1946. The badge said authority. The performance said otherwise. The Wolseley 14 of 60 launched in 1946 from Wolseley Motors of Birmingham, a mid-range saloon built on a warmed-over pre-war chassis. Its 1.8-liter six-cylinder engine produced around 54 brake horsepower, with road testers recording a top speed near 68 miles per hour. Wolseley had a long-standing relationship with British police forces stretching back decades, and the 1460 was adopted partly on the strength of that reputation rather than on its own merits. The illuminated Wolseley badge on the grille, a design touch loved by night patrols for visibility, became the car's most useful feature. The unexpected fact: the 1460's six-cylinder engine, despite its extra cylinder count over rival four-cylinder saloons, produced barely more usable power due to its conservative pre-war tuning, meaning forces were paying a premium for a badge and a smoother idle rather than any real advantage in the field. Prestige without performance. A car that sounded better than it drove. Number 7, Hillman Minx, 1946. Efficient, sensible, and about as intimidating as a delivery van. The Hillman Minx resumed production in 1946 from the Roots Group at Ryton, a small family saloon carried over from its pre-war form with light cosmetic changes. Its 1.2-liter four-cylinder engine produced approximately 35 brake horsepower, giving a recorded top speed of around 60 miles per hour. Some forces used the Minx for community liaison work and light administrative duties, roles that suited its modest size and low running costs. It was never intended as a pursuit vehicle, and nobody involved in specifying it seems to have pretended otherwise. The unexpected fact: because the Minx shared its underlying body and mechanical layout closely with the civilian Sunbeam Talbot 80, a car marketed on sporting pretensions it did not deliver, forces that bought the Minx were effectively buying the same underpowered platform under a different badge, at a lower price but with the same performance ceiling. An honest car doing an honest job. It just was not much of a police car. Number 6, Rover 14, 1945. Dignified, well-built, and roughly as fast as the criminals it was meant to catch on foot. The Rover 14 resumed production in 1945 from Rover of Solihull, a pre-war design relaunched without significant modification. Its 1.9-liter six-cylinder engine produced 65 brake horsepower, with a recorded top speed of around 73 miles per hour. Rover's reputation for solid engineering made the 14 a natural choice for forces that valued reliability, and it saw genuine service as command transport and duty transport for senior officers. Its formal, upright body suited its role as respectable transport for people who needed to look respectable while doing paperwork. The unexpected fact: despite its use across multiple forces as a senior officer's car, the Rover 14's suspension and steering were tuned for comfort in the manner of a pre-war family saloon, and several period assessments noted the car understeered badly at speeds where a pursuit situation would actually demand control, making it a car better suited to arriving at a scene calmly than reaching one quickly. Comfortable, respectable, and consistently a few minutes behind the incident. Number 5. Vauxhall 14, 1946. Modern looks, old bones, and an electrical system that periodically had other ideas. The Vauxhall 14 relaunched in 1946 from Vauxhall at Luton, sharing much of its body-pressing tooling with pre-war stock but wearing lightly updated trim. Its 1.8-liter six-cylinder engine produced around 55 brake horsepower, with road testers recording a top speed close to 70 miles per hour. Several forces used the 14 for radio-equipped patrol duty, one of the earlier attempts to combine mobile radio communication with routine patrol work in Britain. On paper, this made it one of the more forward-looking cars on this list. The unexpected fact: the 14's 6-volt electrical system, adequate for headlamps and an ignition coil, struggled to reliably power the wireless sets fitted for patrol communication, and multiple forces recorded incidents of radio equipment cutting out or draining the battery to the point the car would not restart, undermining the entire purpose of fitting it. A good idea, wired by a car that was not built to carry it. Number 4. Riley RMA, 1945. Genuinely quick. Genuinely temperamental. A car that needed a mechanic on permanent standby. The Riley RMA launched in 1945 from Riley of Coventry, a well-regarded sporting saloon with a twin high camshaft 1.5-liter four-cylinder engine producing around 55 brake horsepower. Road tests recorded a top speed of approximately 80 miles per hour, making it one of the faster cars available to any British force in the immediate post-war years. A small number of forces, notably in areas with faster arterial roads, selected the RMA specifically for its pace, and it earned a reputation among officers as one of the few cars on the fleet actually capable of catching a determined driver. The unexpected fact: the RMA's sophisticated twin-camshaft engine, advanced for its era, required more frequent and specialist maintenance than the side valve units used in most contemporary police saloons, and several forces found the car spent as much time off the road for servicing as it spent on patrol, a poor trade for a vehicle bought specifically for availability in pursuit situations. The fastest car on this list. Also the one least often actually on the road. Number 3. Humber Hawk Mark I, 1945. Dressed for the part, unconvincing in it. The Humber Hawk Mark I resumed production in 1945 from the Roots Group at Ryton, a pre-war design restarted with minimal modification. Its 1.9-liter four-cylinder side-valve engine produced 56 brake horsepower, and road tests recorded a top speed of around 72 miles per hour. Roots had built the original Hawk in the years immediately before the war as a mid-range family saloon, and when peace returned, the fastest and cheapest route back into production was simply to resume building the same car with the tooling that had survived intact. Almost nothing about the Hawk's mechanical layout changed between its final pre-war form and its 1945 relaunch. The Hawk became one of the most widely used police cars of the immediate post-war period, valued by forces for its formal, imposing appearance and reasonable interior space for equipment and personnel. Its upright grille, tall glasshouse, and generous cabin made it easy to fit 2 officers, paperwork, and the occasional detained suspect without the cramped compromises smaller saloons demanded. Photographs of British police fleets from the late 1940s show the Hawk more often than almost any other model, parked outside stations, lined up at inspections, and posed for the kind of official press photography that forces use to project reassurance to the public. That widespread adoption was driven as much by availability and price as by any genuine assessment of the car's ability to do police work. Roots could supply the Hawk in volume relatively quickly after the war, at a price that suited constrained post-war force budgets, and procurement decisions in this period were frequently made on exactly those grounds rather than on road test performance figures. A force replacing an aging pre-war fleet needed cars now, in numbers, at a manageable cost, and the Hawk answered all three requirements convincingly. What it did not answer was the question of whether it could actually catch anything. The unexpected fact, despite being the most commonly photographed police car of its era, the Hawk's side-valve engine and pre-war chassis meant its real-world performance lagged noticeably behind the sportier saloons available to civilian buyers at the time, meaning the car most associated with British policing in this period was, mechanically, one of the least capable options a force could have chosen. Side-valve engines of this design were already considered outdated technology by 1945, offering reliability and low running costs at the expense of the kind of power output overhead valve engines were beginning to deliver elsewhere. For a saloon doing sedate duty transport, that trade-off barely mattered. For a car regularly expected to respond to incidents at speed, it meant the Hawk was consistently among the slowest vehicles on any given force's roster, regardless of how authoritative it looked doing it. The gap between the Hawk's reputation and its capability became something of an open secret within forces that used it. Officers respected the car for its space, its dependability for routine duties, and its imposing presence when parked outside a scene, but few had any illusions about its usefulness once genuine speed was required. It became, in effect, two different cars depending on the job, a perfectly adequate workhorse for administrative and community duties, and a visibly outmatched also-ran the moment anything resembling a pursuit was called for. The car that looked like law and order and drove like a compromise. Number 2. Armstrong Siddeley Hurricane, 1946. Beautiful. Comfortable. Built by a company that had spent the war thinking about aircraft, not corners. The Armstrong Siddeley Hurricane launched in 1946 from Armstrong Siddeley of Coventry, a drophead saloon fitted with a 2.0-liter six-cylinder engine producing around 75 brake horsepower and a recorded top speed near 78 miles per hour. The name itself was not an accident. Armstrong Siddeley's parent group had built Hurricane fighter aircraft during the war, and the company leaned into that association deliberately, naming its post-war saloons after the aircraft it had helped put in the sky. For a force looking to project modernity and confidence in the late 1940s, that kind of branding carried real weight. A handful of forces trialed the Hurricane for high-profile duties, including escort work for visiting dignitaries and ceremonial transport for senior officials, where its refined finish and Armstrong Siddeley's aviation-linked prestige made it a natural choice for appearances. The cabin was genuinely well appointed by the standards of the era, with a fit and finish closer to a private luxury car than anything else on a typical force fleet. It photographed extremely well, impressed almost everyone who saw it parked outside a civic building, and did exactly what it was bought to do in front of a camera. The problem was everything the camera did not show. Armstrong Siddeley's core business through the war years had been aircraft engines and components, not saloon chassis, and the design team responsible for the Hurricane's running gear had spent far more recent time thinking about smooth, stable cruising at altitude than about a car changing direction quickly on a wet British road. That background showed up in the way the car actually drove. The chassis was tuned for a gentle, wafting ride rather than for the kind of sharp, confidence-inspiring response an officer needs when closing on a moving vehicle or reacting to a sudden obstruction. The unexpected fact, Armstrong Siddeley's engineering priorities in this period were shaped heavily by the company's aircraft division, and the Hurricane's chassis and suspension design borrowed more from smooth, stable cruising than from the tight, responsive handling that pursuit or escort driving under pressure actually required, leaving officers who drove it at speed describing a car that felt composed right up until the exact moment it needed to change direction quickly. At that moment, body roll increased sharply, the steering lightened in a way drivers found difficult to read, and the composure the car projected while cruising evaporated almost immediately. Forces that had bought the Hurricane for its image found themselves quietly reassigning it to ceremonial duty and away from anything resembling active response work, which meant the car ended up doing exactly one job well: sitting outside a building, looking exactly as impressive as it had in the showroom, while faster and less comfortable cars did the actual work of policing the roads around it. Built to be admired at a standstill. Less convincing once it was moving. Number 1. SS Jaguar 1.5 liter, 1945. The fastest, sharpest-looking car any British force put on the road in the 1940s. Also the one most likely to leave its own officers stranded. The SS Jaguar 1.5 liter resumed production in 1945 under the newly adopted Jaguar name, following the company's wartime decision to drop the SS badge given its unfortunate wartime associations. Its 1.8-liter four-cylinder overhead valve engine, later enlarged, produced around 65 brake horsepower, with road tests recording a top speed of approximately 78 miles per hour. Genuinely competitive figures for the period, and well ahead of most of the saloons already on this list. On paper, nothing else built by a British manufacturer in the immediate post-war years came close to matching that combination of pace, handling, and outright presence for anything close to the price. A small number of forces acquired the Jaguar specifically for its performance, intending to use it against the fastest civilian traffic and the occasional determined getaway driver, a job description that most of the cars ranked below it on this list simply could not fulfill. On specification alone, it was the most credible pursuit car available to any British police force in the immediate post-war years, and it looked the part too. Low, sharply styled, and unmistakably different from the upright, formal saloons dominating the rest of the fleet, the Jaguar stood out the moment it left the depot. Officers who drove it reported genuine enthusiasm for the car's handling and pace, a rare thing on this list, and several accounts from the period describe it as the first car many constables had driven that actually felt built for the job rather than merely assigned to it. That enthusiasm did not last long once the cars had accumulated real mileage. Jaguar's post-war production in this period, like every other British manufacturer of the decade, was constrained by steel rationing, component shortages, and a workforce still recovering from 6 years of wartime disruption. The company was also expanding rapidly, moving quickly from the SS name to the Jaguar identity and pushing new bodies out of a factory that had not fully caught up with the demand for them. Corners were cut in places buyers could not see until the car had been driven for a few months, and the cars supplied to police forces were built on the same lines, by the same workforce, under the same constraints, as the cars sold to ordinary civilian buyers. The unexpected fact: the early 1.5-liter cars supplied to police forces were built with the same inconsistent panel fit, unreliable electrics, and variable build quality reported by civilian owners of the same model, meaning forces that bought the fastest car on this list frequently found it also the least dependable of any vehicle on their fleet, with several documented cases of pursuit vehicles failing to start or breaking down mid-shift within the car's first year of service. Electrical faults were the most common complaint, followed by inconsistent panel gaps that let in water and accelerated rust in exactly the areas where a car doing high-mileage patrol work could least afford it. A car bought to outrun anything on the road was, in a meaningful number of cases, simply not there when it was needed. In our view, the SS Jaguar 1.5-liter is the most disappointing British police car of the 1940s, not because it was slow or badly designed. It was neither. It is number 1 because it was the car with the least excuse to fail. Every other entry on this list was underpowered, overbadged, or built for a job it was never meant to do, and their shortcomings were, in a sense, forgivable, because nobody involved had promised more than a modest saloon could deliver. The Jaguar was different. It was built for exactly the job it was given, had the specification to do it, generated real enthusiasm among the officers who drove it, and still let those same officers down when it mattered most, stranded by the same material shortages and rushed production that had crippled every lesser car on this countdown, only now with a faster, more expensive, more capable car sitting uselessly at the roadside instead of a slow one. The future of British police motoring arrived in 1945. It just kept breaking down before it could prove it. The 1940s asked British police forces to do modern work with pre-war machinery, and in most cases, that is exactly what they got. These were not badly designed cars, and in several cases they were not badly built cars either. They were cars caught between an industry that had not yet recovered and a job that could not wait for it to. Look at the list as a whole, and a pattern emerges. It is not really 10 unrelated failures. It is one failure, repeated 10 times, in 10 different badges. A factory would dust off a design that had been sitting untouched since 1939, change as little as it could afford to change, and send it out to a force that had no better option waiting in the wings. The Austin 16 was chosen because it was available, not because it was capable. The Standard 12 was chosen because it was cheap, not because it could catch anyone. Even the Jaguar, the one car on this list with a genuine claim to modern performance, was still built in a factory working with the same rationed steel, the same disrupted supply chains, and the same shortage of skilled labor as every manufacturer beneath it in the ranking. Speed did not exempt a car from the decade. It just meant the car failed faster and more visibly than the slower ones around it. It is worth remembering what these vehicles were actually being asked to do. A patrol car in 1946 was not just expected to look official. It was expected to carry 2 or 3 officers, hold up under constant use across long shifts, respond to calls on roads that were themselves in poor repair after years of deferred maintenance, and increasingly, from the middle of the decade onward, carry a wireless set that older electrical systems had never been designed to support. That is a demanding brief for any car. It was an almost impossible brief for cars that had been designed in the late 1930s for a completely different kind of driver doing a completely different kind of job. None of this means the officers who drove these cars were poorly served on purpose, or that the manufacturers who built them were being careless. Most of these companies were doing exactly what circumstances allowed. Rover, Humber, Wolseley, Roots, Vauxhall, Riley, Armstrong, Siddeley, and Jaguar were all working with factories that had spent up to 6 years building aircraft components, military trucks, and engine parts instead of saloon cars. Skilled workers had been drafted, retrained, or lost. Tooling had been repurposed or worn down. Materials that were once routine, from decent steel to reliable rubber for electrical insulation, were rationed, substituted, or simply unavailable. Under those conditions, restarting a pre-war design with minimal changes was not laziness. It was frequently the only option a company had. So this is not really a story about 10 bad cars. It is a story about a decade that demanded more from Britain's factories than those factories were able to give, and about the officers who did the job anyway, in cars that were doing their best with what remained. The pursuit that ended with a motorcycle beating a saloon to the scene, the patrol car that lost its radio because its battery could not carry the load, the Jaguar that had the pace to catch anyone and the electrics to strand its own crew instead, none of that reflects badly on the people driving. It reflects a country still putting itself back together, one underpowered saloon at a time. By the early 1950s, most of these cars had been quietly replaced. Newer designs, built from the ground up rather than resurrected from 1938, began reaching British police fleets with better electrics, more reliable engines, and chassis actually engineered for the job rather than adapted to it after the fact. The 1940s were the transition decade. Uncomfortable, underpowered, and largely forgotten, but necessary all the same. Which of these 10 surprised you most? Was there a model here you did not expect to see, or one you think was ranked too harshly? And do you think the Jaguar deserved the top spot, or was it simply the unluckiest car on the list, the one with the most potential and the worst timing? Let us know in the comments which of these you would have ranked differently, and tell us if there is a British police car from a different decade you think deserves the same treatment. If you enjoyed this countdown, subscribe for more of Britain's forgotten machines, and hit the bell so you do not miss the next one.